All right, good morning. Yes, we have a French guy in DoD to do DevSecOps, kind of crazy. That's a lack of talent. That's why you have to go to attracting talent into DoD and government service, because clearly we need more talent in the US because people freak out when I show up in the DoD. So here we go, slides. So just to give you a little bit of background, we're going to talk about DevSecOps today and what we're doing in the department. I have two hats, right? I'm the Chief Software Officer for the Air Force, but I'm also the co-lead for DevSecOps for the department with DoD CIO. So it's a joint team. And I don't think I need to tell you, of course, everybody knows DevSecOps here, right? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, cool. That's going to save my life. This is kind of the move we're doing right now. Unfortunately, we're still in waterfall, even though Agile is 19 years old, by the way, right? Created my company back in France, I was 15. I'm 35 now, so 20 years, and yet we're still not doing Agile in the department. That's scary. So moving from waterfall to Agile to DevOps, DevSecOps. DevOps is 9 years old, right? And we're still not doing that. Monolithic applications to microservices and smaller code base so we can reuse our code, physical servers to VMs to containers, and yes, we do function as a service as well with serverless. We have that on the stack right now. We'll show you that. And then hosted, a data center to cloud. So when we say cloud, we don't mean just normal clouds for us. We have, of course, edge clouds. What we need, though, is automation and APIs, right? It's not just a virtualization stack. It's full APIs, full automation to get compute storage and all the cool stuff and elasticity of a cloud so we can deploy our stack anywhere, right? Very important for us. So again, that's a joint team. I was at ANS for Miss Lord and DoD CIO, Air Force, DISA. But let's face it, the Air Force is doing all the work anyway. So thanks to the Air Force and our airmen to do all this great work. You'll see we are providing about 172 containers, so the entire stack is containerized. We use Kubernetes as abstraction. You probably have seen that we signed the reference design architecture for the Department of Defense by DoD CIO. There's going to be a memo from Ms. Lord and Mr. Dizzy next week to tell people, hey, if you use that, you can get a Contus ATO DoD-wide with complete reciprocity across the department. So use it, and we'll show you how we can get you a Contus ATO. And all we're trying to do is making sure we're not getting locked into any cloud provider, any platform, and that's what brings Kubernetes as an abstraction stack. And on top of that, you can, of course, pick whatever product you want to use, whether it's PKS with VMware and Pivotal, whether it's OpenShift, or other products. We have Azure and Amazon are bringing AKS and EKS to the Gov clouds just now, so this is great news as well. One of the key aspects of everything we do is on the DevSec side of the house is the baked-in zero trust. And that's very important for us down to the container level. So you'll see we have what we call the Sidecar Container Security Stack, SCSS, which replaces ACAS and HBSS to really be able to bring that behavioral detection and that baked-in zero trust. We have the central repo of container up and running with 40 containers already. So if you need access, you can reach out to us. It's open source. Anyone can use the containers. You don't have to be a DoD contractor or anything to use it. Everything we do is open source, and the entire code and the entire infrastructure as code is open to the public, so you can just ask us access. And we're bringing a service mesh baked in as well. We'll talk about that and the value of that as well. Who has heard of what a service mesh is? Service mesh? That's it? Come on. It's DEF. What? Okay. Cool. Well, see, you're going to learn something today. Not completely useless. So we'll talk about the metrics and thresholds for the Contus ATO. That's very important. You'll see test coverage, automated scanning, of course, static dynamic code analysis, but also container security and bill of material that we're doing with automation. And all the containers are already stigged, already passing the scans. So people can use, our stigged OS, or Java, Python, whatever container, right? And you inherit all that hardening. For people that want to learn more about DevSecOps and service mesh and microservices, we're bringing self-learning capabilities and training. DAU has now the DevSecOps Academy with Sean Brady that's been leading this for the last year. It's actually very, very good. You're going to hear more of the French accent. There's a few videos of me, unfortunately. We need subtitles so we can understand what I'm saying. And then you're going to see the self-learning stack with clouds baked in so you can actually learn, watch videos, and at the same time play with the stuff, right? Because if you're just watching videos, you're not really learning anything, right? And then we are bringing a portal for contracting language for Agile and DevSecOps best practices, so you can just have templated clauses for contracts. That's pretty cool stuff as well. So what's the value for DoD programs? I think it's pretty obvious. You'll see we are bringing cloud at scale. You can instantiate a DevSecOps stack in a week with an ATO. So that's pretty game-changing at different classification levels now. You'll see we go all the way up to SAP. Of course, the ability to get that rapid prototyping going and continuous feedback. And then you'll see, of course, that continuous ATO process and baked-in security, fixing containers in days, if not minutes, and be able to push it across DoD. So instead of having to do patching and vulnerability management of all these tools, your entire CI/CD stack is automated and using our containers, so you don't have to worry about patching. The next really key aspect is the Cloud One. Who has heard of Cloud One? Cloud One? Okay. We're not doing very good at branding. Yeah. So Cloud One is the Air Force cloud. And no, I did not build a cloud. It's really Amazon and Azure. I'm not that crazy just yet. Right now, it's impact level 2, 4, and 5. But we're going to have 6 in December, but we have already access to C2S and C2S for TS. And for the first time ever, we're putting a DevSecOps stack on fences, which is for SAP programs. So we have DevSecOps all the way up to SAP, which is pretty cool. When you get an enclave on Cloud One, you get the cybersecurity baked in, so you get your ATO already taken care of. Single sign-on, zero trust baked in, and it's pay-per-use. So as long as you're sponsored by a federal employee, you can get access and do development there. And you would have a development VPC, a prod VPC, and that's going to seamlessly push your code to production with the CI/CD pipeline. We are, for people that don't know and that are contractors and are interested to help us, we have 3 BPAs on the street right now. One about cloud services, one about talent, so that's DevSecOps engineers, Scrum Masters, whatever development talent. And the last one is for licenses, so software licenses. So the goal for us is to be able to have a program like F16 come to us and say, hey, I need L5 compute, L6 storage, whatever. I need 5, 6 licenses of different tools. I'm not going to use names, whatever tool they want. And then, 5 DevSecOps engineers, maybe a Scrum Master, a release engineer, right, whatever they need. And that's a 10 days award, fast pace. So that's the beauty of those BPAs. We're going to have probably at least 15 awardees per BPA, so that's 45 BPAs we're building. And the award is around November 13th, I believe, so that's pretty fast pace. And after that, we'll do calls every time we need to buy something. And that's not just for the Air Force, that's DoD-wide, so we have the Navy and the Army already interested to use it. What we're also building, which is pretty cool, we realized the Air Force with Chaillan was leading the pack, where is he? He's right here. Say congratulations to Adam for all the work they're doing with Chaillan. Again, Chaillan leading the pack, don't want to disrupt all the good work they're doing, but we also see a lot of different teams trying to reinvent the wheel and build a factory just so they can build software. And again, I think the goal is for them to build software and not so much a factory, right? And so Level Up is kind of that team that's going to be now apparently renamed. The secretary is very excited about Cloud One, and so we're going to call things once, I guess. So Platform One is going to be the platform team. So Platform One by Level Up, I think is the name. So Platform One by Level Up is the team that can come and help deploy a factory for anybody across DoD as a service. So they can just use the containers we're building. So the container team is inside of that team. They can also instantiate a DevSecOps stack on Cloud One or any environment. It's not just for Cloud One. They do it at different classification levels, and they just show up and embed people into the program team to help them also during the day 2 work and understanding DevSecOps. Another piece that's pretty exciting, we're building enterprise services. And thank God, we're not going to have to reinvent the wheel on that one. So collaboration tools, cyber tools, so things like GitHub, GitLab, so always 2 per bucket, right? We want to give options. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So you will be able to go to Cloud One and say, hey, I need 20 users on GitLab or GitHub, and you get access to it. And we manage it, we maintain it. We're going to have a lot of tools, a lot of options, development tools, DevSecOps as a service, so OpenShift, PKS, cyber tools like Fortify, SonarCube, Checkmarx, chats, Mattermost, Rocket Chat, Nexus, Lifecycle, Black Duck, Jira, Confluence, Nexus, and Artifactory. So a lot of baked in. Are you dying? I see your face changing. Okay. Okay, I move on. So a lot of baked in tools that are managed by my team, and you can just use it. The beauty for that is it's a pay-per-use model, but it's, we buy in bulk across DoD, so we see already savings up to 50, 60% on the license side, so pretty cool. All right, if you look at one of the example of a DevSecOps stack, of course, we're covering every aspect from the planning to the development, to the build, to the test. That's just an example. Okay, we have 172 tools, so I'm not going to put all the tools here, just to show you kind of some examples. Everything runs on Kubernetes. Everything is containerized. You have your CI/CD orchestration tool at the center that helps you orchestrate the whole thing. And if you're pushing to Kubernetes, if your application that you're pushing is also containerized, you're going to use Helm or Operator to be able to push that to Kubernetes. But if you're using VMs for your application, you can use Puppet or Ansible or Chef, even though Chef may not be willing to work with the government anymore. And then you have test suites, security tools. We cover every aspect of static, dynamic analysis, container hardening, artifacts, and then, of course, the continuous monitoring side of the house is what gets us that continuous ATO. So you'll see what we're doing on the continuous side on the next few slides using the Sidecar Container Stack. What's important here is that we accredit these containers and we maintain them for you guys, so you don't have to do that. You can just use them as Lego blocks and swap them. So if you come and say, hey, I need GitHub or I need GitLab, it's just a swap of a container. They already are configured for DoD. They already use CAC authentication or other MFA. So it's already baked in. You'll see also we're bringing a lot of exciting things at L5. For people that struggle to do work on L5, we're going to have a VPN. So you can connect from internet, not have to go on Ethernet to go into the VPN. And the VPN is on the cloud, hosted on the cloud, which gives you access to your cloud enclave and also your DoD and emails. So a lot of cool stuff is happening. We're creating devices, endpoints for developers, where we're going to have a Windows 10 image with Linux subsystem. We're going to have Mac OS. We're going to have RHEL already set up, configured for developers. So that's pretty cool. So a lot of baked in kind of tools, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So if you think of the architecture here, we're going to have thousands of this Kubernetes cluster. So that's why it's very important to use containers for us. You can imagine if you have to update all these 25, 30 tools per cluster, that ends up being a disaster very quickly. That's why using containers that self-update, self-heal is critical for us. So the gray box you see is kind of the cloud of whatever program that is using us. You could think of F16. And by the way, we're running Kubernetes on F16 right now. Pretty cool. People don't know that. On the jet, right? Yes?
That's cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Come on. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So top right box is my repo that's replicated into your environment. You can go offline. We have it running on Navy ships right now, offline. And so that gives you the ability to have that replication here. And then we have a centralized Elasticsearch cluster. That's where you get all the logs. Your CI/CD pipeline is containerized and using our Sidecar Container Stack, which will give you a lot of capabilities. One is fluently pushing to Elasticsearch, so we get centralized logs and telemetry. One is zero trust, down to the container level. One is continuous monitoring in terms of behavior and CVE detection. And we also have tools to avoid insider threats. So if someone takes my container and tries to remove the hardening of the container that we've done, it's going to block that. All the containers are signed, and we have, of course, integrity checks. And then the logs can then be pulled by DoD CIO or Air Force CIO or Navy CIO or whatever. Any questions? That's a slide where sometimes people have questions. Yes?
Biggest barriers that you run into to implement it through the Air Force and then through the rest of the DoD?
I think it's a culture. I think the key aspect for us is to bring the DIB with us, right? If we don't have the contractors, some of my programs need 1,200 developers, GBSD, you have teams like F-35, 4,000 developers. You have Aegis in the Navy, 4,000 Lockheed developers, right? So if I can't just do pair programming and show up with a bunch of Red Hat or Pivotal people and say, hey, we're going to train you on DevSecOps. So that's the scale piece, and bringing the DIB with us, I think, is the number one impediment. But I see a lot of the leadership excited about helping their teams learn DevSecOps. The question is, how do you execute? And so we're bringing this self-learning tool, coming with commercial content, video, and that web-based stack to do the stuff you're learning. But there's an AI piece, so if you get stuck, it tells you what to do next. So pretty cool stuff. That will help us scale. Ms. Lord wants us to train 100,000 people in a year, and then people showed up, and said, oh, yeah, I want to do a classroom of 20 people. I'm like, you're missing the point. You're not going to get to 100,000 with classrooms, so we need to do a little bit better. So that's, I think, the tough piece is the scale of what we do. Even, Air Force itself is already massive, but because I do all of DoD, it's just very big. Yes?
And you just said scale is one of the challenges that you're working with. And so DoD Enterprise DevSecOps architecture, can you explain how Kubernetes is really playing into this? Or more specifically, why would you want to sacrifice part of your processing capability for virtualization if you don't need it because you're running enterprise applications?
Well, I think there's multiple things that Kubernetes is going to bring to the table for this. One is the healing, self-healing, self-updating, rolling updates, no downtime aspect of it. So having the factory itself, completely update all the tools without having to do anything manually. So if I get an update of GitLab, and think of, these gray boxes, you can think of having 1,000 of them, right? Because each program have their own enclave and they don't want to share, right? So you have F-35 with dev, test, staging, prod enclaves. And oh, by the way, prod is 50 enclaves, right? Because we have different classification. So then you have, maybe 1,000 of these gray boxes, right? So you want to make sure you have parity and no drift between the environments, right? So very important that we know exactly how the software is going to behave, and also that the software is going to self-update without having to go manually and do any type of manual update. So sure, you have a trade-off of, tiny trade-off, by the way, of performance with orchestration.
Well, so why Kubernetes as opposed to just traditional VMs?
Right, because of the lightweight container stack, right? So the ability to have full inheritance of that OS layer, right? When you're running a container versus a VM, it's much faster, it spins up, it horizontally scales. That's all the benefit of containers versus VMs, right? And if you don't know that, which it seems you don't, you need to look into containers because clearly you don't know what a container is, and that's the value of a container, right? It's how do you scale. Google is 2 billion containers. Google would not exist with VMs. It would not work, right? There's a reason why Google is doing 2 billion containers a week because of auto-scaling and horizontal scaling, right? And the VM is just not fast enough. A container spins up in a second. If you spin up a VM, it's going to just be too slow. And keep in mind, Kubernetes is a bunch of VMs, right? It's just then containers running on VMs. So you have VMs. There's always VMs somewhere. But the key is that self-updating, self-healing, load-balanced container. That's the game-changing piece of Kubernetes. You had a question?
Good morning. My question is about the cloud. I think we can all agree that the next large-scale fight is going to involve the joint force to be successful. So my question about the cloud is, will the joint force have access to this cloud, and how will it talk to the various departments?
Yeah, so right now we already have multiple services on the cloud, and the Joint Chiefs have access. The complexity is always, classification, right? When you get to the higher classifications, but the bulk of the work we're doing right now at the end class, secret, even TS, we have ability to share data and give access. Of course, there is need to know and this privilege, of course. But all the data lakes and data warehouse we're setting up on Cloud One are going to be accessible by anybody, so people can just come and use it. And you can get an account and have your own enclave, but we're going to have stuff like GitHub, GitLab, where people can just come and see the source code that's open source, or the one that's not open source that we still give access to, right? So there's going to be an FOU piece there for that CUI code, but then we're going to have open source. All my stuff is open, so anyone can go and see it, and people can get access to the cloud right now. Need a CAC, but yes.
Thank you. Have you seen any successes yet with the abstraction with PCF or Red Hat?
PKS, yeah, so absolutely. We have 36 programs now moved to OpenShift and PKS.
Underlying Kubernetes.
Yep, so PKS is Kubernetes, OpenShift is Kubernetes. The other good value that Kubernetes brings over something else is that you have dozens of companies that can provide a product on top of Kubernetes, and your code is going to run the same way. So if you move from OpenShift to PKS or PKS to OpenShift, the code is going to behave the same way. And that's a critical piece. So you're not locked into that vendor, but you still have that abstraction layer that is going to behave the same way, right? So if I need compute, I don't go to Amazon APIs and ask for compute, right? I talk to Kubernetes. Kubernetes will abstract it, talk to the API for me, get me that compute, right? That's the value of Kubernetes. It's that abstraction layer and self-healing stack, and that's why we picked it for the entire department. So it's a mandated layer. But you get to pick the product you want, right? If you want PKS, or if you want OpenShift, or if you want AKS, you pick whatever you want.
Nick, thank you very much for being here today.
Sure.
So just had a quick question about monitoring and what is the thinking right now with DoD and monitoring the downstream impact of applications and for the warfighter downstream in terms of like technical debt, the types of the things that we need to manage like Section 508, ADA. How are we going to manage those types of things? And I'll even go a little bit further and talk a little bit about the fact that there's 1 billion people in the world with disabilities, 70% have unseen disabilities.
Yep.
There is a real risk associated with pushing out code, and on the other end, if somebody's colorblind or if somebody has some sort of challenge, there could be an impact to mission. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's a great question. In fact, we have a lot of tools where we're trying to use automation as much as we can, right? If you talk about technical debt, if you go manual, you're going to get into trouble. So we have a lot of tools to address some of what you talked about. There's a 508 compliance tool that will check your 508 compliance. I wouldn't say it's 100% perfect, right? I think it's probably 80%, right? And you still have some human that needs to do some checks. But we have that tool that you see on my list here on the right side for 508 compliance. We have STIG automation. We have all the traditional linting and code quality checks, static dynamic analysis, container security, bill of material. So by looking at bill of material, we can really understand, right, what technical debt you have. I have teams that came and asked for ADA containers. We have an ADA container on the stack, right? And so, which, if you talk to the people that are still behind ADA, they're going to tell you it's still a great language, which might be true, but one might see it as a technical debt too, right? So we have to keep up, at least in terms of knowing what we're using. So the first aspect, and that's why, that service mesh that we're pushing is kind of giving us that visibility in terms of what's being used. So it runs as a Sidecar container. So if you're going to have microservices using, Python, Go, and ADA, right, and you need them to communicate, you're going to need to have, authentication, encryption, load balancing, and usually you end up using different libraries, and that creates technical debt because now you have team A using a library, team B using another one. They have to keep up to date. If you use a service mesh, that's the value of something like Istio. Istio is open source, so no lock-in to a company, right? There's dozens of companies that then use it as a product. So you have VMware has NSX using Istio, OpenShift Service Mesh is Istio. So it's always kind of the same tech layer. But with the Sidecar container, what's pretty exciting, and I don't think people realize the value of Sidecar container. That's another value of Kubernetes, by the way. That's the only product that can really do Sidecar container at scale. A Sidecar runs alongside a container, right? So if you think of a container, you can have a smaller container next to that container, and that smaller container is not inside, it's alongside. So if you think of an agent is just going to be inside, and if the VM is hacked, then your agent is worthless at that point, right? They're going to tamper with the logs, and your agent is not able to see what's going on. With a Sidecar, because it's alongside, not inside, it can still see what's going on. They would have to hack the entire cluster, equivalent to hacking the hypervisor to tamper with that. So that gives us behavior detection and CV signature detection, and the ability to know what's being used. So by knowing what's being used, we know technical debt. We know we can detect, tools being used and databases and all that. And it's also going to enable you to do zero trust, all that east and west traffic management between your containers, between your application, pretty much, right? Even if development teams don't use encryption, I don't care, because my Sidecar is going to inject an IP table, mutual TLS tunnel using the IP table to inject a mutual TLS tunnel. So I'm going to get encryption baked in for free with my Sidecar container, and I get that kind of key strong identity. So each container get a key with the DoD PKI. By the way, we automated that process. So you have that strong identity per container. You know when you whitelist container A and B, who is talking to whom, and that's pretty cool stuff, right? So when you start embedding that kind of continuous monitoring, so that's running in production, right? Not just on the development. We have it on the development, software factory as well, but we have it also in production, and so that gives us that real-time continuous monitoring side of the house. So you will know if some software is pushed that's not compliant as well, right? So 508 is one example, but also just pure security, right? Static dynamic analysis, bill of material. So that's pretty detailed stuff. And if you look at the list of tools we're covering with the container stack, right? Think of all these tools you're running as VMs now that you have to manage and update. And the key difference, right, is again, treat your container as cattle, not like pets, right? So VM, you give it a name, you want to care for it, you want the VM to stay up and running. Container, we kill it every 4 hours, right? So we just kill it, we just self-update it. So if a bad actor got a foothold in the container, we kill it, every 4 hours. So that's also reducing risk, and it's called moving target defense, right? They restart to the immutable state, and so by definition, if a bad actor got in, it's going to be tougher to laterally move. Plus, we have the zero trust stack, so even if they can move, they can only move to a very few set of containers. Look at the list of the programming languages we got. We have 16 languages, right? We have 23 databases, including big data, graph database, TAN database, NoSQL. We have API gateways. We have message buses, proxies, logs, web servers, serverless with Knative. So that's the same thing, right? You could go and use Amazon Lambda, and now you're locked into the Lambda stack from Amazon, or you can use Knative, which is open source and runs on Kubernetes, which will bring you the same capability as serverless and Lambda to do function as a service and not be locked in. So that's the kind of stuff we want to push. So your code is going to behave the same way, no matter what cloud you're using, no matter if you're on premise. And what happens when you move that code from your development enclave to your production environment, where you don't have Amazon, right? We want it to behave. And that's the beauty of Kubernetes. It's going to abstract the stack, and it can work on VMware vSphere. It can work on any stack that's not Azure Stack or Amazon Outposts, which brings Azure and Amazon capability on premise, right? Build tools, test suites. Look at the number of test suites we got. Test coverage tools, configuration management tools, and again all the cyber side of the house. Automation of documentation generation, automation of bill of material, automation of STIG, compliance. And all the containers are already stigged, already ready to go. And then, of course, the monitoring side, that's where we have tools like Prometheus for alerting, Chaillan, for people that don't know, Chaillan is a visualization tool on top of Istio. So you can actually see in real time your east and west traffic between your containers. So you can actually see who is talking to what. And that's very interesting when you build software, so you find bottlenecks, right? And then you have all the secrets and the storing of keys and encryption keys and collaboration tools as well. There's a question.
Sure. Thank you. So how is this going to change the game for software, SaaS vendors, or systems integrators in the industry now as we go forward? And as organizations look to procure their application stack and everything like that, how does it go and fit into this?
So we have a lot of vendors that can give us their containers, and we are accredited DoD-wide. So think of the value for someone that's going to create a capability. Instead of giving it to us as a SaaS, they could still give it to us as a managed service and pay it as a SaaS model, but they can give me the container, we put it on my repo, and it's accredited DoD-wide. So they can just send us that stack, we scan it, we approve it, and so we have a single point of entry for that company to give us updates, right? So think of that value of accreditation, complete reciprocity across the department. They don't have to go and talk to each team and explain why the product is allowed to be used on CPLNet or not, right? So we do that centrally for them. But of course, it has to be a container. If it's a SaaS and you're back to FedRAMP, so that's the value though, because even if you go and do FedRAMP High right now, you can go up to L5, right? But you can go to secret, you can go to TS, right? And so our stack, we want it to be agnostic of classification levels, right? So if they give it to me as a container, which is, most new companies are building containers now, and they can give it to us this way. It's as easy as deploying it on the cloud. So they just give me the container, I accredit it DoD-wide. So that's I think the value for vendors. That's why we have so many vendors reaching out to us to be added to the repo. So anyone can come and ask to be added. We have a vendor onboarding guide on the repo to explain the process, but it's very streamlined. Can take up to 2 weeks to be approved, and it's a DoD-wide approval, so it's pretty quick compared to a year FedRAMP process, right? Yeah.
So if previous vendors weren't already integrating these tools and like a broader DevSecOps model into whatever they were building on, whether bare metal or VMs, how is this new model actually going to change their behavior? poor software development lifecycle like behavior before. Now they're in containers, which is just a deployment orchestration mechanism and is orthogonal to security.
Right.
And now we have a bunch of tools. So how are we actually changing behavior or improving security?
That's a great question. So we have baked in gates on the pipelines, right? So if they don't pass test coverage, so every time we work with a program, we define, okay, your business systems, you're at 75% test coverage. Your weapon system, you're going to be anywhere from 85 to 100%. Test coverage, and then, okay, for your category 1 findings in cyber, and so in real time, every time they push code multiple times a day on that CI/CD pipeline, the gate will block the build if they don't pass those thresholds. So what we're helping with the AAOs is really to define, okay, what that number is, right? Is it 10 days to fix a category 2 finding? A category 1 is blocking the build, so each AO can decide what that number is based on the risk, right? But they get that testing, so unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, regression testing, Monday, so the code will not even pass. They will not be able to build it and deploy it. It will break the build. So that's really hard gates that they have to pass, and if they don't pass the gates, they are paused until they fix it. Nothing. Yep.
We could have totally done that.
Absolutely.
Specifically of like software engineering, like I feel like when they killed the 30OX4 career field, when they killed the 30OX4 career field, a lot of that skill went to the contractors and civilian side of the house. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like there is a need to have software developers, not just for application building, but also for purposes of offensive cyber.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we have a new software career track we're working on in the Air Force to address both enlisted officers and civilians that want to be able to have a career in software without having to, move from a development job to a managerial role, right? Which is what happens when you need to be paid more and, increase in title and pay. And we're going to fix that by building career tracks where you can pick that track and you can improve in title and pay, and you can decide not to be a manager, right, and still be a developer or a data scientist and be paid based on your experience and not just based on, your degree or how much time you spent in the agency. So that's happening now. We have already a few things happening with 8K, 16K for officers. But we have Hill Air Force Base Tinker with 4,200 civilian developers there. So we really want to pay attention to these guys and make sure we retain talent, train them on DevSecOps. So we're going to have specific training there. And so career tracks are coming. It's not easy because you're touching the OMB, OPM stuff. And so I'm working on a draft within a month that will go then to the Secretary and Secretary of Defense, Air Force, and SecAF and SecDef to review that. If they agree, we could do things like run officer for software or civilian career track, enlisted. We have a lot of great people in Level Up or E7 enlisted. So we want to make sure we can keep them. And they're refusing pay increase right now and rank increase just to stay in the job, which is not cool, right? So.
So beyond the tech stack, the Air Force is reorganizing. It looks much different than any other CIO type organization in the other services. Can you talk to how the Air Force is reorganizing itself to adopt this into the organization? Things like the establishment of a CXO position and the increase of designers, product managers within the Air Force. Could you talk about how that change is occurring?
Yeah, we have a lot of new cool titles. When I started, I said, I want to do everything like the commercial side, and the first thing they did is come up with a title that does not exist on the commercial side, right? Chief Software Officer. Ideally, I shouldn't be here, and that should be a CIO role. But the issue is often, the fact that the CIO was not in the past at least, enabled to execute work, right, and deliver the capabilities, right? So my shop, I actually report to the acquisition side, so I get access to the funding, the program funding with Dr. Roper, so we can actually get access to program funding to get things done without having to wait, 2022 to pump money and get it done, right? So that's a big difference. We have a chief transformation officer now with Lauren, who has been leading with Castle Run. She has a new cool title. We have a chief experience officer now in the CIO shop too, to help with like user experience, not just UI, right? Complete experience of the onboarding, of the life of an airman, during its service. So a lot of pretty exciting things. I think it's often the number one impediment is the lack of enterprise funding. So I'm building enterprise capabilities by using program funding because they need it. And we're kind of hacking the system to still make it sustainable, right? But Cloud One and all these different teams we talked about today would not exist, right, without enterprise funding. And you can scale. Even though you have a pay-per-use model, you still need to have that base layer of funding to fund the base layer, right? Otherwise, you can't grow. So I think that's where we need to do much better is funding enterprise services at scale. And there's a lot of cool stuff that are coming, but it's just 2 years down the road, and we can't wait, right? So one of the cool things that we have for people that spend a lot of time struggling with CAC authentication and single sign-on, we have a container that you can use as a sidecar container or as a microservice. So you can put it alongside any tool. So if you have a vendor that does not support CAC, or you can put it alongside that tool, and now you get a single sign-on stack across your entire cluster, and you get that strong identity across. So that's things like that I think not having to reinvent the wheel and build your own authentication and all multi-factor authentication is pretty cool. That's it. Any questions? Sorry, maybe no questions. I don't know.
I think that is all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.